Welcome back to the Psychedelic Mom podcast. And I am so thrilled to be here today with Glauber Assis. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Michaela. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you for the bird sounds behind you. It sounds so beautiful. Where are you?
I'm in Brazil right now, in the beautiful state of Minas Gerais, Santa Luzia. We are facing in Brazil right now the most difficult drought in Brazilian history. So everything is very dry here, a lot of criminal fires, but the birds are still singing. So there is still hope. And I'm glad that
Oh,
we are here living
yeah,
together this life.
beautiful. And I know you have 3 children, and you've been in the psychedelic space for about 15 years serving medicine in Brazil and globally. Can you tell me a little bit about you from our audience? You've done so much. I know you also were a co-author and editor of a book that we were just talking about that really highlights invisible women's voices in the psychedelic space. And you're also at Shakuna. So let's have you dive into a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, so I'm Glauber Assis. I'm a Brazilian sociologist. I have a PhD in sociology, and this is an important part of my life, academic studies and research. So I've been doing research on ayahuasca for around 15 years now. But more important than my academic background is my identity as a father. So I'm a father of 3 children. They're beautiful. Yesterday was the birthday of one of my sons, Guaraci. He
Mm.
turned 4 now. I also have Gael, that is 6 years old, and Yara Maria. Yara is 2 years old. I'm married with also a medicine woman, Jaqueline. We live here in Brazil in an ayahuasca community. So I'm also part of the Santo Daime tradition, the Santo Daime Brazilian ayahuasca religion. And here, alongside my wife and my community, I lead a tax exempt ayahuasca church in Brazil for 10 years now. So every single weekend, we hold space for ceremonies to
Wow.
receive people and also have good partnerships and allyships with indigenous peoples and indigenous leaders. So we work with the Tucano people, Huniquin people, some representatives of Yawanawa, and also Omagua Cambeba. But I was born in a very conservative town, although I consider, alongside some of my friends, Brazil one of the most psychedelic spaces in the whole world. Brazil is still very conservative, and we still suffer from stigma, prejudices related to psychedelics, sacred plants. So I was born and raised in a very conservative town. And it was a long journey until I had a chance to find myself through psychedelics, because as a Brazilian, I also was raised thinking that my identity as Brazilian was not very good or something I could be proud of. So I wanted to be a person from the global north. I wanted to learn German. I wanted to pretend that I was something or someone I wasn't, until I get to know ayahuasca. Then ayahuasca changed my life. And then 6 years ago, I had this amazing psychedelic journey of becoming a father. And after that, I also found myself one more time. So now I'm pretty happy. I'm sure I found my space in the world as a researcher, as a psychedelic person, as a father and a parent. And now I decided to pursue this goal also of holding space and creating a network of protection and friendship together with other parents. So now I worked for Shukruna Institute for a couple of years, but now I'm full time involved with this new project that is called the Psychedelic Parenthood Community.
It's amazing because similarly, I was raised in a very traditional Catholic upbringing in the global north. So psychedelics were not even slightly on the radar as something that would be a potential to use for evolving, deconstructing, any of it really. So I'm curious about your process because you have younger children. So lucky for you, you came into the psychedelic space younger and you have a church around you. In the West, the children and the family aren't really part of the psychedelic renaissance. It's still a lot of the research on PTSD and trauma and healing one particular pathology. How do you think we could begin to shift toward psychedelic parenting, psychedelic families here?
Thank you for this question, Michaela. I think this is a very good one. And actually, this reminds me of a very interesting saying, and I will quote here the indigenous Brazilian philosopher Ailton Krenak. And once someone asked Ailton Krenak, "What is life?" And then Krenak answered, "Life is a cosmic dance." And I think this is a very beautiful way also to look at psychedelics as a cosmic dance, because it's not only about the substances, although they can also be considered sacred and very healing, but they're not only molecules, they are also culture, they are also music, they are also worldviews, cosmovisions. So when we talk about psychedelics, we can talk about them from different perspectives. And there are some scholars that acknowledge that we need to talk about not only the substance, but also the set and the setting. And the setting, I think it's still underrated in the Western world. And there are so many things we could explore if we take seriously that setting is a central part of our experience with psychedelics. So a couple of years ago, I started doing research in indigenous villages, indigenous cultures, and I had a chance to go to the Indigenous Ayahuasca Conference. Nowadays, I am one of the volunteers in the Indigenous Ayahuasca Conference, and it was amazing. I was shocked because I'm used to go to conferences and academic events, but when I was there, I saw all those families together in the middle of the conference, and moms breastfeeding their children, and the speakers, before giving a lecture, before talking, they would be served with big glass of ayahuasca. So it was a completely different perspective. And then I realized that we could take advantage of saying all the time that psychedelics can expand our consciousness, to expand our creativity in order to reinvent these spaces. Because I live in Brazil, and when I go to the US, I see all these beautiful conferences with a lot of important discussions, but I don't see children, I don't see families. And when I talk to people, especially moms, they need to be heroes in order to attend this kind of conferences because they are attached to their children, they're attached to their families, and there are no children, no adolescents in these spaces. Why is that? And this is very interesting, the opportunity to talk about it, because it's not only about bringing children to this space. That's not the main point. But if we consider families, if we take seriously that we are embedded in cultures and our families are important to us, then we have the possibility to reinvent these spaces and to be really inclusive, diverse, and so on. So these are one of the reasons why I believe that the discussion about families, children, and adolescents is really important for the collective healing we are seeking, you know?
So before we get into like children and what you've seen having children at ayahuasca circles and things like that, can we talk a little bit about ayahuasca? Because I think one of the pieces, maybe even that we're missing, is maybe even a devotion to the feminine. And ayahuasca, what is the original story of ayahuasca and this medicine?
Amazing. Thank you for giving me the chance to talk about this very interesting and complex subject. I do believe that one of the most important things when we are talking about plant medicine in general and sacred plants, but specifically about ayahuasca, is to acknowledge the huge and amazing and beautiful diversity. So when we talk about indigenous traditions, some indigenous peoples, they even don't like the term indigenous traditions or indigenous peoples, because some of them believe it's too generic, because actually they are very diverse, they are very different, sometimes divergent as well. So when we talk about ayahuasca, we are talking about more than 70 different traditions, each one of them with a different cosmovision, a different mythology, a different relationship with the plants, and different healing methods, trainings, and so on, relationships. So it's really good if we are also committed to decolonize plant medicine to understand that these voices are plural. If we are talking about the Honey Queen cosmology, for example, ayahuasca would be related to the snakes and the gift that the snakes gave to human beings. If you're going to talk about the Yawanawa tradition, we have a different perspective related also to a feminine energy. If you're talking from the Tucano perspective, it's also different. And we are going to talk and to hear about the creator of the humankind, who was a feminine goddess. When we are talking from the Santo Daime perspective, the ayahuasca came as a gift from the queen of the forest, so also related to a feminine energy. What we can say for sure, more than acknowledging the diversity, that I think it's really important, because much more interesting that these Marvel comics and Spider-Man and Superman and so on are the indigenous stories behind this plant. So that's why I'm also committed to tell children stories about these sacred plants, because they are so beautiful and full of adventures. And of course, not trying to compare these stories with North American television, anything like that, but just acknowledging that although they're very serious and very important and very deep and philosophical, they're also full of joy, full of amazing narratives about life, about the feminine, about how to protect, about how to take care of people. So I think this acknowledgement that feminine energy is the one that balances the whole universe is a good starting point to talk
Mm.
about this plant medicine.
Thank you for sharing just the ones that you touched on, how different the relationship with ayahuasca is between different cultures. What are some of the similarities, would you say, in the peoples who use ayahuasca, as far as, are there similarities in their cosmocracy or the way this medicine used, what they report on, what it teaches them?
Yes, there are many differences and many similarities, and something that really touched me. And I think this is a very good piece of advice to the whole Western psychedelic field
Mm,
is rather the competition, the coexistence.
mhm,
Because although we have several indigenous peoples with different traditions, different perspectives, they could all be able to coexist during the centuries and still resist it. They're still resisting nowadays. They are still the guardians and the protectors of this sacred plant. So I think that coexistence is something really beautiful that we can learn from indigenous perspectives. I think it's something that many of them share in common, this ability to respect the others, this ability to acknowledge their own tradition and at the same time respect the others. I think this is an important point. But
mhm,
there are also others, for example, dietas, that is related to preparation and how to prepare to experience these visionary and non-ordinary states of consciousness. So usually in many ayahuasca and indigenous traditions, we are going to see a very important preparation before the ceremonies, before the experience, other things as well, like music. That's something really important, but something that people sometimes they don't know it and don't tell about. And I consider central is the collective element in these experiences, because I love many indigenous speakers. And when I was in the ayahuasca indigenous conference, I saw one of the chiefs that I love very much, and I asked him how could he speak so freely with such a confidence and in a very beautiful way. And he said, because it's not about me, I'm not speaking anything, I'm representing my people.
mhm,
So when I talk, I represent my whole ancestry. I represent a lot of different voices. So there's no way to not talk, to not speak, because this is my responsibility. So I do believe that something that is shared by many indigenous traditions is this sense of belonging. So when they are serving the medicine, they are not serving representing only them. And I think this is a very important difference between indigenous perspectives and the Western perspective. We see, for example, this contemporary plant medicine circuit and people that are serving the medicine just because they want and just because they want to have fun. And I have nothing against having fun, but this is different. When we see indigenous voices talking about these plants, we are going to see a whole people, a whole tradition being represented in every space they are.
So when you serve, you're serving every weekend, which I can imagine the energy that that takes. Pretty wild. And the beauty of the things you're seeing and the difficulty, all of it, the complexity of a ceremony with ayahuasca and holding space for so many. What age are some of the children that partake in ayahuasca, and what do you see?
Mhm. Wow, this is a good question because this is also related to culture, and I want to be very
Mhm.
respectful about this topic because I believe it's and I know it's very sensitive in North America. So when we talk about children being part of psychedelic cultures, it's not about giving psychedelics to children because we know a lot of people complaining like let's just avoid talking about children regarding this topic, it's too sensitive and so on. So it's not about only the substance, although this can be a beautiful part of the life of the families. So
Mhm.
just announcing this disclaimer or something like this, I can talk a little bit about many traditions. So in the funk tradition from Gabon, for example,
Mhm.
children they can at some point consecrate iboga. And also when we are talking about the huichol, the huijarika tradition in Mexico, some children they are going to be allowed to also ingest peyote. And when we are talking about ayahuasca traditions, that are the ones that I researched more, we can see children, we can see pregnant women. But since you asked about my practice here and my own experience here, because we serve the medicine every weekend, then we have our own perspective on that as well. So we consider sacred plants to have personhood. So
Mhm.
they're not only plants, they're also entities, they're living beings. They have consciousness, they have a higher intelligence. They can help us, they can be good friends, advisors, they can take care of us, protect our communities, protect our families. So it's important that everybody can be welcome in this environment. So in Brazil, because we also have a lot of ayahuasca traditions, and we had a beautiful political discussion about this topic as well. Ayahuasca is legal. So the parental rights
Mhm.
actually overcame the prejudice and the social stigma associated to the use of these plants. And in Brazil, parents they can give ayahuasca to their children in ceremonial contexts. The same thing related to pregnant women. They can also be part of the ceremonies, but usually they are going to drink smaller doses,
Mhm.
symbolic doses. They're not going to have like huge experiences or purge or challenging experiences in general, but they're going to be part of it. They're not going to
Mhm.
be forbade to attend a space to be part of this ceremony. So, in the Santo Daime context, pregnant women they drink a little bit of ayahuasca. Children they drink a little bit of ayahuasca, and we also have this amazing ceremony that is related to childbirth. Since Santo Daime also was born in a very difficult context in the middle of the Amazon rainforest with no health care and so on, they developed this way of resisting and surviving. And it's pretty much related to the empowerment of women. So we have midwives in Santo Daime that are experts in helping women with childbirth in ceremonies. We see the women taking care of the pregnant women. We see people giving small drops of ayahuasca to the newborns, And this can be beautiful. And I can tell, if you want, a little bit about my own experience, because my children were all born in this context.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I want to hear that. You're reminding me of a ceremony that I had actually. And it was showing me the way that I was supposed to be born. And it was outside. Women were taking care of my mother. They were like touching her hair. It was very natural and beautiful. It was really interesting to come back from that and see the medicine teach me about a alternative birthing way. Yeah, so I'd love to hear your story.
Yeah, amazing. And also, this story has also taught me that we should overcome these religious and moral prejudices, because some people in the global north are saying this topic's very new. We still don't have research. We still cannot say anything about it. But actually, it's the most ancestral thing in the whole humankind. This
Yeah.
relationship between human beings, families, and plants and fungi.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting. I was just saying to you before we started that I was just at a conference, and with the podcast and just being in this space, I've had hundreds of conversations. And so I was thinking that potentially would there be anything new that I would learn at this conference? And I was thinking, wow, no. And we've had decades and decades and decades of research in a Western model. And we have centuries of indigenous use of these plant medicines. So it's so interesting for people to ask for more research and more more knowledge.
Yes, yes, I agree with you, definitely. And also, we can always have more research and good
True.
research.
Yep.
The only thing we should not have, since we are also part of this psychedelic resurgent, is, prejudice against ourselves. I can't understand this kind of
Mhm.
thing. And because, as you said, we have also good scientific data and evidence supporting psychedelics. We also have, if you consider social sciences and human sciences as sciences as well, we have many, many, many dozens and dozens of theses and dissertations. So we already have very good amount of information. And if we take into account also indigenous knowledge, and because some people they use indigenous wisdom, but actually it's also knowledge. It's knowledge for real. And then
Mhm.
we are going to open our minds to infinite possibilities of having joy in this life and healing, and cultivate also bonds of kinship. Something that caught my attention recently was a paper that was published in a scientific journal by a bunch of indigenous scholars. They were challenging this very notion of psychedelics, which I like actually, but it was just a very good provocation, because they coined this term kindelics instead, because it would,
Psychedelic?
yes, because it
Uh,
wouldn't be related to our mind manifesting, but to our kinship manifesting.
mm,
So this brings to the discussion the possibility of creating bonds of kinship when we are connected to these plants. So this can be something amazing. And all my stories behind my children's lives are connected to psychedelics. They also all love our context and our psychedelic culture here. But talking specifically about my daughter, her name is Yara Maria. My wife was pregnant, 38 weeks of pregnancy. So we were not expecting yet that Yara would be born. And we had hired a very good team of nurses to assist this childbirth. I was in a ceremony and my wife was at home. At that time, we didn't leave at the center that we hold together. And then she was there at home. I was in a ceremony. It was very synchronous, because in my tradition, we always say "Viva," so that means something similar to "Hail." So I said "Viva as crianças," which mean "Hail to the children." And then she started. She got into labor, and she called me, and then I was like very happy, but we called this team of nurses and they weren't available. Actually, they were in another town. They could not assist us, but they said, don't worry, it's going to take several hours. But my wife had a feeling that at this time it would be quicker, faster. So we were a little anxious because we lived in the countryside, far from the hospital. And then we thought about what we would do. Then we decided to hold space for a private family ceremony, just us, the children there, to ask a tip of advice to the medicine. And then my wife, this is also a way, because we are all use it to this biopolitical control over the bodies of women and children. And then this can be a very sacred moment of women protagonism regarding their own bodies, their own lives. And then my wife decided that we needed to go to the hospital. We went to the hospital. I brought a bottle of ayahuasca with me. And then she wanted to open a ceremony when I was turning on the car. So she said her prayers. We were confident, but she was having a challenging time. And then in the middle of the way, she said, Yara is she's being born right
Oh
now.
my gosh.
And we were just us. I'm not an expert in this kind of subject at all. And in Belo Horizonte, that is a huge city here, downtown, and it's also symbolic because it was in the street corner between the Bahia Street. So Bahia is the most black state of Brazil. So it brings also these Brazilian roots that are deep rooted in Africa, and the Tupinambá Street. And Tupinambá is an indigenous people from Brazilian history. So when we were there driving, Yara was born. So I just have 2 minutes to be there to receive Yara. My
Wow.
wife did all the work that needed to be done. And then everything was fine. She was healthy. It was amazing. It was one of the most psychedelic and amazing moments I had in my life. And then the crowd started coming, and then we were afraid of the crowd. And like an evangelical woman said, "Oh, please, praise God!" Now, and people shouting. And then I just drove very fast to the hospital. And once we were there, the medical doctor just said, "There's nothing I can do right now because you did everything that needed to be done." And Yara is here laughing, playing at
Amazing.
the backyard right now. And my point being, it's not only about taking and ingesting psychedelics, about how being part of a culture, a psychedelic culture, a psychedelic community is a way to be confident in life,
Mm.
is a way to feel protected, is a way to move forward despite all the challenges, despite all the difficulties that we have in life.
Mm. What a beautiful story. I love her being born at the intersection of these two streets that have significance. It's so beautiful. How old is she now?
2,
So how old did you say your oldest was?
6.
6. Okay. How would you say that a psychedelic journey and an ayahuasca, your relationship with ayahuasca is similar to parenting?
Wow, I would say that children are amazing teachers. Being a parent, it's difficult, very challenging, and we are never prepared. And ayahuasca as well. I see also those people saying, now I learned everything regarding ayahuasca and sacred plants." And they go to the next ceremony and they say, "I never come back anymore." I do believe that these are all very meaningful existential experiences in our lives, central in our existence, very challenging. They teach us a lot and very beautiful, all at once, all at once. And once we are committed to these experiences, because there's no turning back. Once you are a parent, you are a parent. It's part of your existential condition. It's like those spiritualist traditions when you receive a new name, and this is going to be your new name forever. The
Mhm.
same thing when we become a parent, we are a new person, and this is going to be with us forever and ever. And I would say that this is the same thing, and that's why psychedelics in general, but specifically when we are talking about the organic field, the organic realm, so sacred plants, fungi, once we are there, we need to realize and understand that this is very important. It's deep, it's not just, an experience that we have and that's it, and you go back to your normal life, because this is a commitment to changing our perspective, changing our lives. And if we have enough number of people committed to the same vision, maybe we can also make a difference in this world.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit before about the earth medicines, how they really are calling for a decolonization of our minds, deconstruction of maybe some of the things in our history and in our culture that haven't served us. And I like that you continue to speak about the family, the medicine as something more than just an experience, that we really need to know how to hold that space, build those containers, how to integrate it, how to take that wisdom and knowledge given and actually apply it to our lives. It's not that simple. I actually, when I was doing some research on you, I heard you on another podcast, and you mentioned something about some of the things that psychedelics can teach us. And it's funny, you mentioned maternal or paternal guilt. And about a week ago, it's very interesting. I was traveling and I had a small, like micro dose of mushrooms and ended up going to bed later, hours later, and suddenly got hit with maternal guilt. And I was like, wow, this can go really deep. And I had the ability to say, this is a really old pattern of looking at like that, not giving enough, not doing enough, and was able to go through the journey and allow it to go. And the journey became beautiful. But it's such a lesson. Medicine has so many lessons for us when it comes to, you were just talking about the body of women, taking our bodies back, having a deeper understanding that parenting is really hard. We all are doing our best, that this is a lifelong journey. It's an evolutionary process for both the parent and the child.
Yes, definitely. And I've been thinking a lot about it because, yeah, as a man that was also raised in a very conservative and complicated culture regarding families and many other topics, I was tempted to naturalize this way of life of being a father. So the only thing I need is to have enough money to pay the bills and everything. That's why also psychedelics are very important to me as a human being, because
Mm.
psychedelics don't let me play this game, and they are always calling my attention to my children, to my role. I do believe that part of the healing is in making men responsible in this debate as well, about care, about love, about holding spaces, about protecting people, creating safe containers. So I'm very grateful for thinking about this, but it's been brutal, I would say, because I'm always dealing with this feeling that I have so many things to improve in my life, to be a better parent, better human being. And sometimes I'm very sad about this as well. But then I heard a very nice friend of mine, and she said something that touched my heart. She said that a very good way to overcome this toxic masculinity is to take care of other people, especially vulnerable ones, especially our children.
Mm.
So no matter how sad I am, no matter how many mistakes I'm making right now, I look at my children, they are still smiling at me. Their eyes still love me, and this brings me back. So I would say that I can't separate my family, my children from my psychedelic experiences. I think this is very important lesson for the whole world, but most specifically for the global north. Let's not separate. Let's find good and safe ways to integrate. It's better.
Speaking of that, so you're part of the Santo Daime church, and there are some in America, aren't there?
Mhm.
Yeah. So how many churches are there in America where someone who is listening, that is really drawn to this idea of being held in a container of other people who are doing ayahuasca as a community, as a sacrament? Where are some of these churches?
They are all over the United States, actually, and there's something beautiful about these churches as well, because Brazil, now we also have non-Brazilian and non-Christian churches in the US. And I want to just mention briefly the case of the Church of the Eagle and the Condor. that is now legal in the US, and this is an amazing case. So congratulations also to all the Church of the Eagle and the Condor Church team. Until now, Brazil was the only country in the world that developed not only indigenous traditions on ayahuasca, but also structured religions that consider themselves as religion. So in Brazil, we have three different ayahuasca religions that are União do Vegetal, UDV, Santo Daime, and Barquinha, the little boat. Barquinha is still very local, but União do Vegetal had an amazing trajectory in the United States and won a lawsuit against the Supreme Court of the United States. So UDV is now legal in the whole US territory. And Santo Daime has some legal churches as well. The ones that I know are mostly located in the state of Oregon. But we also have this gray area and several other very structured and also safe churches to drink ayahuasca. So we have different branches because Santo Daime in Brazil, we call them lineages. We have different lineages, different perspectives regarding the same religion. It's more or less compared to the history of Christianity, and we have the Catholics, and we have
Mm.
Lutherans and evangelicals, and so on. So in Santo Daime, we also have different branches that are independent from each other. Some of them are legal, but we can find churches in the West in several states. According to my personal research, we have more than 50 Santo Daime churches in the West nowadays.
Wow. And I heard that the United States and Brazil are the largest groups of people that sit with ayahuasca.
This is incredible. I think we still need to do more research to understand this better and to confirm this information and this evidence. But according to ICEER's research, the US now is the country with the larger number of people consuming ayahuasca right now, drinking ayahuasca right now, which is shocking and although very interesting. But I would say that we need to have more research on that because also in countries like Brazil, it's difficult to do this kind of research. Many of people, they don't disclose their experiences. They prefer to not tell anyone that they are drinking ayahuasca, for example. But it's fascinating also this bridges between the global south and the global north. And something that happened in the past few decades is that the ayahuasca vine started growing in Hawaii. So nowadays, several groups are based in Hawaii, also growing and harvesting their own ayahuasca plants and also cooking and also distributing, which is something huge that brings a lot of discussions, dilemmas as well about safety, harm reduction, but also about cultural appropriation, about honoring the global South traditions and so on. So we are living in interesting times.
So do you help with some of that? Were you part of any advocacy to help with the Santo Daime churches coming to the United States and forms of legalization, anything like that?
No, not really, because this is a process that started a couple of decades ago. And I started going to the West actually very recently. I was, I wouldn't say afraid, but resistant to travel abroad, especially to the global South. But then I realized that there is a calling from the forest we need. And this is something that Davi Kopenawa, the Yanomami shaman, told me. We need to spread good words and good seeds in order to spread public education, wisdom, knowledge, but also to face bad practices that unfortunately are also abundant in this field. But I work for the biggest Santo Daime institution in the world that is named ICEFLO. And ICEFLO is also the bigger umbrella in which many US based churches they are part of. So I know some of the discussions. I participated in some of the meetings and gatherings, and I try to support, try to do my best. Sometimes I go to the US and I hold ceremonies in the Santo Daime Church that are in the US. But I also need to acknowledge that this goes back to at least 30 years, 25
Mhm.
years. And there are many men and women that fought hard to have this protection or at least practice in the West now.
Mhm. What would you suggest for someone that's listening who maybe has done ayahuasca, maybe hasn't, is really listening and feels the appeal to returning to nature, returning to a wisdom of the plants and doing it within a community? Would you recommend that they go to one of the churches in the United States?
Yes, definitely. There are many, many safe spaces in the West, many committed people in the West. I would also quote Ailton Krenak again because he's such an amazing philosopher. And once someone asked Ailton Krenak, "What do you think about this internationalization of ayahuasca?" And he
Mhm.
answered, they can invent a hallucinogenic brew named ayahuasca. They can invent a soda named ayahuasca. They can invent a pill named ayahuasca. But if they don't know what the shaman talks to the plant, the only thing they're going to invent is a ticket to nowhere.
Mhm.
So, what I would say is that first thing, don't be afraid of the cosmos. I
Mhm.
like this concept of a Brazilian black philosopher that is called cosmophobia, because we know that the Western world is not against drugs at all, because they are serving tons of drugs to people of all ages, including children, some people, politicians, and so on. Some people who have this power of making decisions that affects a lot of people, they are afraid of the cosmos. They are against of the
Mm.
otherness. They are
Mhm.
against of the things that they cannot just control and be the owners of.
The
And then
mystery.
there's, yes, they are afraid of the mystery. That's true. And
And I think too, the idea that taking control out of the individual and the kinship as well. I mean, these plant medicines continue to show us that what is within us, and it's in some ways a war on consciousness, a war on connectedness. I know in the Western world, there's a lot of depression, there's a lot of separation, isolation, individualization, where I think the psychedelic communities, when done right, really centered around the plant wisdom always is about community, reconnection, like the mycelium.
yes, I agree. Totally, totally. Yes, and this is other similarity between families and psychedelics. If you want to be a good parent, you can't control your children. You
No.
can trust, you can be a good teacher, you can protect, you can do many, many things in order to be a loving mother or father or caregiver, but you can't control. So it's pretty similar. We can't control the journey with these
Mhm.
amazing substances, but we can do a lot of things. And something we can do is to look for a safe space, a safe container, and there are ways to find good places. So you can, for example, take a look in the background, the trajectory of the facilitator. Since you mentioned community, you mentioned family, something important is that a good leader will always have a connection with a bigger community, a big culture. So, what are the ties and the connections that the facilitators of a center or of a ceremony have to the protectors and the guardians of these substances, no matter what kind of substance we are talking about? So I think this is a very good way to understand. So we can also protect yourself, bringing a friend, asking for information beforehand. You can take a
Mhm.
look if they have a website. You can also understand your rights, also to have clear in your mind what the boundaries are. So touching, for example, is a very sensitive topic, especially when we are in the middle of a ceremony or under a psychedelic experience. So it's important to read about it, to do your own research in order to go to a good and safe space. But I will definitely say that there are many good people in this field as well.
So we both stand on the shoulders of those that came before us, not just our families, but your book that you co-wrote and co-edited really speaks to the voices of women in the psychedelic space. And uncovering those invisible voices. Could you highlight a couple here? When I was reading the book, I was fascinated. Like, I didn't even know about Hoffman's associate that actually rode the bike home with him, and she was the first woman potentially that might have done LSD. There were so many interesting aspects that I didn't know. Are there a couple that you could highlight for women out there? Because I know I certainly stand on the shoulders of these women that came before me.
Yes, there are many things, but it's important also to be humble enough to acknowledge that, first of all, we need to hear more women also talking about women and women perspectives.
Mm,
And this book was envisioned by amazing women in this field, and I was just a helper or a supporter. I did a very,
mm,
very small part of this work. And by the way, it's Women and Psychedelics Uncovering Invisible Voices, and it was published by Synergetic Press and Chacruna Institute. People are always asking also about Chacruna Institute, who does a great work regarding publications and public education. But it's important for me to tell people that I'm not working with Chacruna anymore, because now
mhm,
I'm committed to the psychedelic parenthood community. This book was edited by several voices, which is also symbolic and interesting,
mm,
because collective voices, they are more powerful than individual voices. So when we are talking also about healing, it's important to consider not only individual healing but collective healing. For example, depression is a very, very, very complicated and difficult challenge of the whole planet, the whole humankind. But it's not only individual.
mm,
So we should also pay attention the roots of this problem, roots of this epidemic, and the roots, maybe perhaps they are in our own civilization, in our own system. It's important to try to understand our history, our trajectories, our connections. I'm saying this because many of the most amazing and important things that we have nowadays, they were built through several centuries, and people gave their wisdom, their knowledge, their voices, their lives, their blood, everything, their tears, to make the things that we are living now possible for us and for our generations. And when we are talking about psychedelics and we see these lists, for example, the list of the most important people in the psychedelic field, the vast majority of the people that they show are white men from the global north. But actually, women, they played, they play, and they will continue playing a
mhm,
central role, fundamental role. So it's important to acknowledge this. The same thing when we are talking about BIPOC people
mhm,
and other social minorities as well. I think this book is amazing because this book gives the reader a glance on how important the work of women have been to this field. I was a co-author of one of the articles that was co-authored also with my wife, that is about the matriarch of the Santo Daime Church. Because when we talk about Santo Daime Church, the only people that we see are the men and the leaders and that are in the West and so on. But actually, we could see Santo Daime as a through a feminine lens, because it's a religion that was a gift from the goddess of the forest, the queen of the forest, a universal goddess, according to the Santo Daime perspective. And nowadays, the most important Santo Daime leader, she's going to turn 100 years next year. She's
wow.
still here taking care of everybody, and very strong, very beautiful. Madrinha Rita, she lives in the forest in the state of Amazonas. So my wife and I, we tried to honor her history, sharing this article. But we have many other stories, the one that you shared, but also this is something also we should overcome and we should challenge and face. It's a colonized mind that we still carry in this field.
Mhm,
So, like when we talk about science and we talk about concepts, let's just hear the men. And now we're going to talk about children, and maybe we're going to talk about the forest. So let's bring women and indigenous voices to the conversation, which is a lie, because women and indigenous peoples, they have been central in all the debates, the religious rights, for example, but also science, also intellectual perspectives. And when we talk about Betty Eisner, for example, and we see the development of this concept of matrix, then we
Mhm.
have an amazing perspective on how our experience with psychedelics is affected not only by set, setting, and substance, but also the whole environment, our the zeitgeist, the civilization. So this concept that a woman bring, in my opinion, can really, really make a difference in our perspective. So I think this book is also an invitation to not only take more seriously the work that many women have been doing in this field, but also to open our ears to hear. Because if we are able to hear, maybe we are going to learn also how to heal.
It's fascinating. I had mentioned to you that I just came back from a psychedelic conference, and it was more than 90% men speaking. It was very interesting because there was a conversation about creating the microcosm for the macrocosm. And there's this belief that through earth medicine and psychedelics, our consciousness is raised and all these potential things can happen about our deep understanding. So it is interesting at times to go to a conference where there's still a lack of awareness of the space being taken up, the lack of awareness of how few women's voices there are within a psychedelic community that has had a significant amount of medicine. And I have to be honest, I was like a little frustrated. And then I just kept noticing and noticing others. We had some conversations about it. And then dear friends of mine, I just watched them. And instead of being upset about it, they just brought a different way. One offered a tea ceremony every morning, and one offered, it was like became like offerings, like a generosity to have a circle, generosity to connect with music. And it's interesting sometimes to still navigate the asymmetry of power, even within the psychedelic space, which is, you would hope, more conscious than the general population. But at times, it's not.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for sharing. This is a very important perspective. Thank you for bringing it. My postdoctorate was about the conspirituality, that is, this overlapping between psychedelics and negationists, denialists, conspiracies, and worldviews that are not attuned to expansion of our minds. There is also a very good article that talks about this, about psychedelics being pluripotent, because they can open many doors, including some that are not going to be good for us and for anyone. Sometimes I say, although this is not something very smooth or light, that psychedelics are not going to save the world,
Mm,
because there is something that psychedelics cannot do for us. That is our own part, our own role. This is on us. And this is important because, for example, please accept my apologies, everybody, because my voice today is not good. And this is because Brazil now is living the most terrible drought in Brazilian history. So, thousands of criminal fires, including in my neighborhood here right now. This is something psychedelics cannot solve just being ingested, but psychedelics can help us. And this is enough. This is more than enough. So
yeah.
they can help us to understand who we are, to understand our role here, and also to give us protagonism about our own lives. So if we want to create safe spaces, it's not just about taking psychedelics. So when we see, for example, the ceremonial spaces, and we see people, and usually men, like competing to see who is going to be the one that is going to drink the biggest dose or take the heroic dose.
Uh-huh.
But it's not about that. There are other layers that are very important. Being committed to social minorities, indigenous rights, understand climate change, understand what's going on in the wars that we are living in right now, immigration. So many sensitive topics that are only going to be solved through our actions in this world. So
Mm.
psychedelics, of course, they can play a very, very, very important role in this, but we need to be not only humble enough to not spiritual bypassing everything
Mm.
and taking our own responsibility, but understand that the world is bigger, so we should not replicate these things that some religious fundamentalists they say,
Mm.
like it's just about the book. So if you read the book properly, everything is going to be fine. And we should not say it's just about psychedelics. It's just
Right.
psychedelics, everything is going to be fine. But more than that, we can accept the challenge that psychedelics it can help us, but we still need to study, we still need to learn, we still need to be better people, we still need to love. And I think this is a good way to see these challenges with hope, and also with the assistance of psychedelics, of course.
Yeah, I agree. I also think what you're speaking to is also just the humility to also know we're always all in process. As someone from the global north, in my own space, just trying to think, what are the ways in which I still need to grow? We only have the consciousness that we do at the time. I look back 5 years ago and think of the things that I had no awareness of. I'm sure I still will look back 5 years from now and think, wow, I had
Yes,
no awareness of that. So that continued humility. And as you said, psychedelics aren't going to fix things. I think the deep commitment, as you talked about, to the integration and the real effort to, if that protagonist medicine is showing you something, to do the work, to find really good people that can also continue to highlight the aspects of you that are still in need of change.
definitely. And this is something, yeah, that I think can be also connected to the discussions about neuroplasticity, for example. And when I see children, and I think psychedelics give us the opportunity to be more like children in a very good way. I mean, because I see children and they are committing mistakes all the time, but then
Mhm.
they start committing better mistakes and then better mistakes and still having joy. I also do believe that psychedelics they have this amazing properties of supporting us to be open enough to resist through joy and through being in the process and trusting the process. And I was in a retreat in Jamaica. It was a mushroom retreat this year. And there was something that one of the facilitators said that I liked very much. They said, like, instead of using the word surrender and fear that are very strong, we could maybe use also strong words, but that have a different connotation. So instead of surrender, we could use allowing.
Yes.
Instead of fear, we could use respect. And I do believe that if we allow ourselves also to make mistakes and also, to laugh on us, and if we respect ourselves as well, but other people's as well, other traditions as well, so we can really be in a good position to create safe spaces for everyone.